it was the best gift I could have been given, because getting laid off kind of took me off a path that I probably would not have taken myself off of. And it got me onto a new path that has really formed the foundation of everything that I get to do today.
So for folks who would probably experience that burnout or that depression or that situation of, oh, I just can't do this. My emotional capacity and my mental wellness and health is at stake here. What would be your suggestions, your inputs, or your advice?
Anybody who has spent probably 10 minutes looking at jobs on LinkedIn, right, knows how soul-crushing that can be. Life design for me starts with an intentional, creative, and curious approach. And there are 4 steps, and they are the following.
Thank you for joining another episode of the season 3 of our podcast, Meaningful Marketing, Mentoring, Mattering, with me, Joseph Alcantara. This season is titled The Power of Pivot, and it is focused on amplifying the stories of individuals who transformed through moments of transition, layoffs, life shifts, burnout, and breakthroughs, and how they eventually found clarity, creativity, and the purpose on the other side. In our podcast today, we are graced with a very special guest that I managed to meet during that pivotal moment in my life. And in that one single session, I am proud to say that she helped guide me through that process of where I would want my life to be. Her name is Ashley Jablow. Her work as a career redesign coach, facilitator, speaker, and artist perfectly embodies that journey that we'll be talking about today. From her time at IDEO and the Obama White House to founding Wayfinders Collective and empowering thousands through design thinking, journaling, and life design, she's helping people transform transition into intention. Please welcome to the pod, Ashley.
Hi, Joseph. Wow, what an amazing overview of me. I feel like I want to bring you along to introduce me everywhere.
Well, thanks for that. Because honestly, when we had that initial conversation, I was like, people need to hear the actual life story, the inputs and the ideas and the practical solutions that Ashley can offer, especially for everyone in this situation. But before we dive into that, I want to hear your meaningful life story. Let's start from the very beginning. Take us through that lived experience to that little Ashley, that origin story that made you who you are today.
Goodness, I love thinking about little Ashley. Again, thank you for having me, Joseph. I'm thrilled to be here, and gosh, the power of the pivot. I'm so ready to talk about it. And in many ways, the beginning of my story is, you could probably call it like my resistance to the pivot. So I grew up in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area. My grandfather was actually one of the first founding employees at Hewlett Packard. And I think in many ways that speaks to like the energy and spirit of Silicon Valley, and innovation really kind of runs in my veins. I went to a very competitive all-girls middle school and high school where I was really kind of taught explicitly and just implicitly that if I didn't want to grow up to be the first woman president of the United States and cure cancer at the same time, then there was something wrong with me. And so I've always been very ambitious. I've always been a perfectionist. I've always felt like if I can't get it exactly right, then what's the point in doing it? And in a funny way, my overachieving kind of attitude and spirit led me to some really incredible places. I started my career in the nonprofit sector. Social impact, environmental impact was really important to me. I got my MBA and kind of somehow managed to get a job at IDEO, one of the world's best known design and innovation firms. I'd never worked in design thinking, had never even worked in consulting really. But again, it was sort of that drive to get the biggest, baddest job I could find. So I landed at IDEO, spent 4 years drinking from that fire hose. And then from there, I was like, where could I possibly go next? Oh, I know, the White House, right? So my drive to to achieve really led me to some incredible places. And also, almost at every step along the way, I realized I call it buyer's remorse for job seekers. I realized within days, sometimes even within the first day, that I was in the wrong place, that I was a square peg in a round hole. And it really wasn't until so after I left the White House, I joined a Spanish design firm. Again, like, the first woman on the executive team opening up their first US office in Washington, D.C. And then I got laid off. And it wasn't until I got laid off that I started realizing, like, oh, I'm going to have to try something different. I'm going to have to rethink this. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to do it out in the open when I don't know what I'm doing, right? Like, it's sort of a double whammy. It was the best gift I could have been given, because that really getting laid off kind of took me off a path that I probably would not have taken myself off of. And it got me onto a new path that has really formed the foundation of everything that I get to do today in my career. And so I'm super grateful for it in a funny way. But again, that pivot was a hard lesson to learn.
I have a lot of questions coming from that, story of a child being an overachiever, being in a culture and in a family that really, you know, is valued, deeply rooted on success and the beauty of it. And, you have everyone within your circle who you will be emulating, but also at the same time, having that realization that this doesn't seem to fit into who I am, right? And then eventually being thrown in front of a brick wall and realizing that, sorry, you're laid off now, right? So, three different mini moments in your story. I want to understand first, when you were growing up in that environment that's filled with overachievers or the models that you can emulate in your life, did that affect you significantly in terms of how you are charting and following that seemingly linear path of where you would want your life to be? And how were you able to break out of that mold and cycle that made you realize who the real Ashley really is?
I mean, there's no doubt that it had a huge impact on me. And the thing is, even thinking about my relationship to the word success, I've come to believe that success, it's funny. When I grew up, I was taught that I needed to be successful. I needed to strive and achieve. That was expected. But it also was like not something we were supposed to talk about, right? It was not something we were supposed to be humble about our
Mm,
success. And over the years, what I've come to really embrace that success is something that drives me. That's a good thing. I'm motivated to be successful in my own way. So it's sort of an interesting dance, because I absolutely, as a kid, was taught that success is good. And I still believe that success is good. I think the difference for me is that what I've learned is that I get to set my own definition of success.
mm,
Whereas when I was a kid, it was really, this is what good looks like, whether that's in your career or in your relationships, in like who you date, and even like how you plan your wedding, to how you show up in the community, how you volunteer. Like, this is the package it should come in. And by extension, the package you should come in. And over the years, I've really come to see that I actually get to set my own definition of success. So, I mean, it's interesting when I think about when I got laid off and what enabled me to start asking those questions. Who am I? Who am I at my most authentic, right? I think the reason I was able to start asking some of those questions is because up until that point, I had followed everyone else's definition of success. And look where it got me. It got me laid off and completely confused about how I was going to pay my rent. So, like, even just a little chink in the crack in the foundation, so to speak, opened up the potential for me to start asking questions, like, or just even realizing, wait a minute, everyone said this is the direction I should go in. Everyone said that it would quote unquote work if I just followed these steps. And look where it's gotten me. And that was really the opener for me to start asking more authentic and true questions and looking for my own authentic and true answers.
That's a very powerful moment, which I think a lot of people, unfortunately, in the world right now is experiencing. Because I myself, we were following that arbitrary goal that the world taught us that this is what success looks like: money, power, prestige, the resources in life that makes life safe, comfortable, free, and convenient, right? But also at the same time, it kind of masks who we really think we are up until that day that we were just stripped off of this. And I think within the context of professional development and career goals, it's within that context of suddenly being laid off. But in your story, you said that that was a pivotal moment. The power of the pivot started there because that's when you started to think for yourself, discern, and realize what is really important to Ashley. What does success really look like for Ashley? So, looking back, can you take us through how you were able to navigate that path? Because connecting the dots, looking back, it's easier right now because of where you are today. But I'm sure a lot of people who are in that dire situation right now would have that question: how do I do this? Where do I start? How do I navigate the path moving forward? Can you guide us
Yeah.
through that process?
Gosh. I mean, I can share my own story, certainly. I think one of the things I see a lot in my coaching practice with my clients, especially with folks who have just been laid off or who are even worried about getting laid off. There's a lot of that kind of anxiety floating in the air as well. One of the things we talk a lot about, and I can see that I did this in my own experience without even really realizing it, we talk about separating the short term from the long term. So
Mm,
a lot of times what happens when we're either navigating a career transition or like in a career crisis, right? We tend to want to solve for both time horizons at the same time, right? Like I need to pay my bills and I also want to be an artist, right? I was just having this conversation with someone the other day who's thinking about a new job and she's like, I really need a more flexible schedule in the short term, but I also really want to sell my art and like have a huge following on Instagram. And then we talked about like we need to solve for these two different time horizons differently. So, in my experience, when I got laid off, solving for the short term meant starting to freelance and also looking for jobs. Like, I wasn't immediately sure that I wanted to start my own business. In fact, I was pretty sure I didn't want to start my own business, but I did know I needed to pay my bills. And so I talk a lot about that first year after getting laid off as proving the business model of Ashley. It was
mm,
like, what will people pay me for? UX design, design research, facilitation, like experimenting with how do I pay my bills in the short term, right? And then there was also the longer term questioning around, well, where do I want to go? And what I realized soon after I got laid off was that I'd been working in innovation and I had all of these methods and tools and frameworks in my toolkit that I had been using with clients for many years. And I asked myself, what if I turned my tools on myself and
mm,
created my own career design sprint, right? It was, again, it's short term, starting to take on freelance clients, starting to, continuing to apply to jobs, brushing up my resume, all of that.
mm,
And also at the same time, I said, okay, I'm going to design or run like a career design sprint. That's what I called it. I called it a 60-day sprint actually to redesign my career. Like, you know, not exactly even then long term. I mean, 60 days is like nothing, right? But I gave myself that summer to sort of expand my thinking. And I can tell that story because newsflash, 60 days is still not long term enough. But, I do think that that's something I would really encourage listeners to consider is like, can you pull apart your short-term needs, even your
Mm.
short-term goals from your longer-term dreams, and know that you can build towards the long term while you're working on the short term, but not, I see it a lot, not being able to pay your bills, right? Is like such a creativity killer. So solve for the short term first. Figure out how you can feel safe and secure and stable, and know that you can work towards the longer term vision that you're holding.
Thanks for sharing that. It's a very crystallized and tangible method, which I think a lot of folks who are in that situation can really take away something to explore. Spoken like a real design thinker, you mentioned about the 60-day sprint, about designing your long term or medium term goal, while also at the same time looking at the other passion points that you have in life that you can also facilitate and navigate and bring to life that you didn't have a chance to do before when you were so damn busy with your 9 to 5. You know what? My personal takeaway there is that it provides you that map or path to follow. However, my question there would be, wouldn't that be much harder to do? Because, let's be realistic about the realities of life here. The monthly bills would have to pile up on a monthly basis, right? So as I explore my 60-day path of trying to figure out what I really want to do, but also at the same time, trying to apply for 9 to 5 jobs. So it's like I'm wearing two hats at the same time because I need to make sure that I provide based on the short term needs that I have, but I also prepare for the long term goals that I personally have now that I have the opportunity to do so. So for folks who would probably experience that burnout or that depression or that situation of I just can't do this. Time is not enough. My emotional capacity and my mental wellness and health is at stake here. What would be your suggestions, your inputs, or your advice to those people who might probably be thinking that way?
Yeah, it's such a good question and it's such a good point because the likelihood for burnout, the likelihood for anxiety or depression or just general like what's the point of it all is very high, right? So two things come to mind. The first is that although I do stand in think about short term and long term, I do not in hindsight believe 60 days is enough long term. Like it's not long enough. Like I will say, let's think in the increment of years. Okay. Like let's
Mm,
think in the increment even of seasons. Like I am in, if you've been laid off, you are in a season. Seasons last at least a few months, right? They could last a couple of years, maybe not Mother Nature's seasons, right? But generally, career seasons, life seasons last a while. And when you can extend that timeline out and say, yes, I have my short term needs, and also I'm in a season of figuring out what comes next, to me, that feels like an exhale. It feels like a much more sustainable pace. It's a hard truth. It's a hard pill to swallow, right? Because when we're unhappy in our career or any aspect of our lives, we don't want to sit in that ambiguity of how's it all going to work out. Nobody wants to sit in that discomfort. And there's a lot of benefit that comes from acknowledging honestly, this is going to take me some time to figure out. Right? So
mm,
that's the first thing is just giving yourself more breathing room, lengthening your timeline of how even your expectations of how long something's going to take, right? That's the first one. The second one is have some fun. And like, I know that that sounds kind of like I'm, joking or whatever, but it's actually really pretty serious. It's super important when you are looking for a job, when you've just been laid off, or you're just generally feeling stuck, it's really important that you are making time to have some fun, to pursue things that bring you joy, to tinker with hobbies, to pick up your paintbrushes, whatever it might be, to cook a new recipe. Like it's important that you take care of yourself in a creative, playful, even colorful way because you have to refill your creative well if you want to be able to solve this problem differently or more effectively, right? And so often, especially when we're job searching, like we think my job search should be my full time job. And that means
Mm.
I'm going to be on LinkedIn for 8 hours a day. Anybody who has spent probably 10 minutes looking at jobs on LinkedIn, right, knows how soul crushing that can be. We don't want to spend all day doing that. Yes, you want to spend some concerted effort networking, getting your resume ready, learning about what's happening in your field, right? And yes, actually applying to jobs. But you also have to have some fun. You have to be pursuing things that bring you joy. And they don't have to be big things. We're not talking about you've got to take a vacation and sit on the beach for a week because you enjoy that. I'm talking about sitting outside on your porch with a coffee and listening to the birds, right? Or picking up your colored pencils or taking your dog on a new hike, right? Like have some fun along the way because you need to fill yourself up in a really difficult season.
That is great insight, especially on the context of life seasons and advice when it comes to having fun. Because, first, on the life seasons, I recently heard on another podcast, we are so accustomed and trained in this generation to see life as a progression, a hierarchical kind of ladder that would have to go up and up and up from step one to step 100. But in reality, if we're going to look at Mother Nature, it's cyclical and seasonal. There will be moments of spring, summer, fall, and winter. And a person's reality is very much the same, wherein we shouldn't be looking at a race in such a way that it's a sprint that goes up the ladder, but it's really more about the ebb and flows and or the peaks and troughs and the four kinds of season that life would have to offer us and we ourselves would have to embrace. So I think that's such a beautiful advice that you've mentioned. And also about the having fun on the creative aspect, for example, I think a lot of us, you were talking about the little Ashley. I'm thinking about the little Joseph as well. When I was younger, I used to be more artistic. I really explored my creative side. And then when life happened, everything would just have to go to the back burner because being fun and creative is not real life anymore, which is sad, I think, right? So now my question to you is first, how did the creative part of Ashley became an important part of all the pivots that you have made so far in your life? And how important was that that allowed you to really have those unlocks and maybe realize that, okay, this is the new season, this is the new path that I would have to get myself into?
Such a juicy question. I mean, I think creativity and leaning into my creativity has actually been my greatest unlock, probably. Just even that question is going to make me I'm like ready to journal on it a little bit more because there's like something really interesting there. So, I grew up not only with the vibe of overachieving and success in the air, but I grew up with the most incredibly creative artistic mother. My mom, Janice, is an artist through and through. And for many, many years, I mean, I've always been creative, but I've never thought of myself as an artist necessarily. I always sort of let my mom take that title. You know, my mom is the artist. And one of the biggest pivots actually in my professional life, in my whole life, was thanks to COVID.
Mm,
COVID was a terrible experience on so many levels. And also, I think we're starting to see how many silver linings and opportunities for innovation COVID created. So when I think back to March of 2020 and beyond, I was working previously to that as an in-person front of the room facilitator. That was the bulk of
mm.
my business. And so in one fell swoop, all of that work went out the window, right? And I was a couple years into running Wayfinders Collective and suddenly I had nothing. I mean, I had no planned revenue, I had no clients, nothing. And oddly enough, the only thing that made sense to me in that moment was to pull out my paintbrushes. Now, I swear, Joseph, I think in hindsight, I don't even think I realized I had paintbrushes. Like it wasn't something I might have even used my son's art supplies in the beginning. Like I really had not nurtured that part of myself. But for any number of reasons, the only thing that I felt called to do was to paint.
Mm.
And I mean, this shouldn't surprise you now, given what you know about me. I wasn't just painting like, flowers or birds or whatever. What I decided to do was create a series of, actually, in the end, it became 100 watercolor postcards. They're about 3 by 5 inches of different innovation frameworks, coaching concepts, even like metaphors and visuals that I'd been playing around in my head that I decided to put onto paper. And I called the series 100 Days of Designing My Life. And I just, it was the funniest thing. Just, I felt so compelled to create this. And once I did, in the end, in the beginning, I had started with, I'm going to create one of these a day for 100 days. In the end, it took me 2 years to finish. It took me a while. And once I had them in my hands, I kept just holding this question of, what am I going to do with these? Right? Like, I had shared them on social media. I'd gotten a lot of great feedback. People were excited about them, but I really didn't know what I was going to make of them. Like, if I even needed to make something of them. But I just kept sitting with that question of, what what might these become? And literally, it took me 4 years to answer that question. And in the early part of 2024, I committed to writing and self publishing 4 guided reflection journals based on my art, based on these 100 watercolors that lead people through the 4 steps that I really believe everyone needs to practice to design a career and life that they love. I will say, you asked me, like, what role has creativity played in all of this? And I could have never imagined that picking up my paintbrushes would not only get me to a place where I've written these books, right? And self published them and sold them and all that, but the confidence, the opportunity my creativity has given me to step into the next version of me is just so profound. I would have never anticipated. Um, I'm so grateful to my creativity that it led me here, and it's so unexpected for me that it's just been a joy. And even now, I mean, you introduced me, Joseph, as an artist, and I'm still like, am I really? Are we sure? Like, is that right? But the truth is, yes, it is, and I'm practicing owning that. So it's been a lot of fun to reconnect with my creativity over the last few years.
Beautiful. I love that. And when I wrote your introduction, because I've seen your work, right? I purposely put the artist in there and specifically asked this question on creativity as a prompt because I know it will lead to this discussion. Because what I love about your story there, Ashley, is that the experiences that you've had as a professional, all about design thinking, the theories, the concepts, everything that you have learned in university and have applied in your corporate life is in there. Also, at the same time, the story of your childhood with a mom who's an artist and you honing that talent when you were younger has already been innate in you, but you just probably temporarily put it aside up until COVID. And then that reflective thought of, okay, all of us are in a lockdown, and then I have to put my facilitation business on the side for now because it's COVID, pick up that paintbrush again and try to put something that kind of connects your creativity, what you know based on your professional life and your personal passion point, and mesh that together and see how it turned into a masterpiece that did not only help who you are, but are also helping the people who are using that right now. So I want to take time for you to talk us more about this very important book and the 4 key points that people should be asking themselves so that it'll be a great start when it comes to finding out more about the vitals in life that we should all be considering that's beautifully captured in your book 100 Days of Designing My Life. Can you share with us more of
Yeah.
the details, please?
Absolutely, absolutely. So it might help to start with a brief definition of how I define life design, because I think that that is a phrase that I have been holding on to for many years, and I think it's only starting to become something that people kind of understand, gravitate towards, or even recognize is a thing. So life design for me starts with an intentional, creative, and curious approach, right? To ourselves, to who we are today, to what matters to us, and then actually to creating it. And there are 4 steps. They're steps, they are behaviors. I think they're also mindsets and values that we can embody. And they are the following. The first is to discover. So discovering who you are today. Again, I there's who little Ashley was, and she in some ways is still here, right? But there's also updating my story for who I am today. So we have to pause and discover, even rediscover ourselves at whatever stage of life, whatever season we're in. The second step is to define, defining our priorities, our values, our goals, even our criteria for success, right? Many of us chase other people's definition of success, but what is your definition of success? That's the second step. The third step is to imagine. Now, we often think about imagination being the thing of 5-year-olds on the playground, right? But it's super important that as adults, we are indulging in and cultivating our imagination, our creativity, again, our sense of play and fun, but also our dreaming, our visioning, right? We don't often pause and step back and say, like, what if I could wave a magic wand? What if, right? So that's the third step. And then the fourth step is what I call iterate. So I am not a big fan of radical, drastic action. If you have ever had a bad day at work and contemplated bursting into your boss's office and rage quitting on a Tuesday afternoon, right? I do not recommend that. So to iterate means to take small, consistent, incremental, even sustainable steps every single day that are going to move you forward rather than ripping off the band-aid. So what I have here in my journals, I've actually written 4 of them,
Mm.
and each one emphasizes and guides you through each of these 4 behaviors. Across all 4 journals, there are 100 days of reflection and questions to prompt your own self-exploration and learning. And every 25 focuses on one of these steps. So the first
Mm.
one is really all about guiding you to discover about yourself, about who you are, about the world around you, right? And each volume after that follows that kind of flow. And it's been so fun to share these with people. Again, initially it was, what can I do with my art? And over time, it has turned into really a powerful tool that people use, whether they use them every day or they dip in every once in a while, right? To help guide their own inquiry about themselves and about where they want to go, and then actually equipping them with the tools and the frameworks and the methods to actually go out and do that. I had someone who used the journals recently who said that it was better than therapy, and it was like having a conversation with a parent or a caregiver that they had actually never had but wished they could have. So it's been such a delight to see these journals take on a life of their own. And I really do believe that out of anything you could practice or learn, these are the 4 steps that will get you to where you want to go.
Those are great questions and steps, Ashley. And then you beat me to it because while you were trying to describe what it is and the path that you should follow to go through that process, to me, I was already thinking that will be very therapeutic, but it's not therapy. So I was like, I'm so excited to dive deeper into that as well. So can you let us know where we can get that, by the way, where
Yeah.
your books are available, the journals?
Absolutely. So right now they're available on wayfinderscollective.com/shop. And you can buy one at a time or all 4 in the complete set.
I love that you also gave that, freedom or style in terms of how we can use that so that we wouldn't be focusing, oh, 100 days, I need to make sure that I answer them. We can deep in and out. And like for now, because it's summer here in Boston, I do my 2 to 3 times morning run. And as I do my morning run, I always have one prompt that I try to meditate and reflect on. So I think your 100 questions, which can serve as a prompt for me while I jog or run, is gonna be a beautiful reminder of, okay, let me reflect and contemplate. I'll make sure that I grab it.
I love that. I love that. Yes, I'm a big believer that, like, I'm not giving out gold stars. There's no A plus to earn on this, right? So even in the journals, I have instructions. If you want to give yourself structure, you can pick, page one and flip through every single page for 25 days. But you can also just open the book to wherever you find yourself and see what inspires you, right? So I love giving yourself the flexibility to use them however works best for you.
Beautiful. Ashley, I've learned a lot from this conversation. And at the same time, I'll be taking away a lot of additional prompts as well to think through, especially on this very existential phase of our lives. And I think being able to sit back and think about the things that truly matter is going to be very helpful. So I think my last question to you, which goes back to what this podcast is really all about, which is defining, finding, and living life's meaningful meaning. My question to you is, with everything that you have experienced, your roles, the roles that you play, the pivots that you have made, what for you defines a meaningful life? And how do you see yourself living that every single day?
It's a biggie, Joseph, right? I think today's draft answer, because I always work in drafts, my draft answer today is that living a meaningful life is stepping into the fullest expression of who I am in service of guiding others to do the same.
That is beautiful. So, and I think, the kind of energy of selflessness and being the best version of yourself and showing up to the world that way is going to be something that a lot of people will be able to hopefully be inspired with. For those who will probably be identifying and resonating with, be able to emulate. And I think a reminder for all of us to find that truth inside of us and realize how we can best approach our life the way that we are created and the way that we are designed based on the choices that we make. So I think, Ashley, I want to give the floor to you right now to share with our audience how they can reach out to you if they have more questions, if they're interested to be coached by you and to find out more about the business that everyone can benefit from. Let us know.
Yeah, well, I would love to be in touch with your listeners, Joseph. I have a feeling that the folks who listen to this podcast are kindred spirits with me and with our shared kind of interest in the journey of life, right? So, yeah, so people can learn more about my work at wayfinderscollective.com. There's a whole bunch of information about coaching with me, about my journals. I also publish a weekly newsletter where I share actionable tips every week to get unstuck, get clear about what matters to you, and to get going on this journey. So you can find that at wayfinderscollective.com/newsletter. And then, of course, I would love to start having some conversations with folks. I'm very active on LinkedIn as well as on Instagram. I'm dabbling with TikTok and YouTube, so you can find me over there too if that's your platform of choice. But it would be great to connect with folks.
Well, again, Ashley, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure that everyone did as well. Looking forward to more amazing moments that you're going to share to the world and unselfishly bring to life that will touch other people's lives. Thank you so much, Ashley.
Thank you.